Good afternoon or morning, depending on which time zone you're joining us from. I want to thank you for attending our first ever live Q&A at Ancestry.com. This morning we will be discussing how to make that key find in 15 minutes or less. And we have two fantastic experts to take your questions today. On the left is Krista Cowan. She is a genealogist who has been conducting her own research since she was 12 years old. And she is currently our Community Alliance Manager for the Ancestry World Archives Project. Next to her is Ancestry Ann, aka Ann Mitchell. You may know her from her column in our monthly newsletter, as well as the great responses she gives in our weekly newsletter. Ann is a Senior Product Manager of Search here at Ancestry.com, and she's also an avid genealogist. Now, I want to tell you really quickly how you can submit questions. We've had people submitting questions already via the Events tab at Ancestry.com. Now that we're live, I'm going to switch that up just a tiny bit for you. So you'll see on your screen right now a bar that says Check In and Chat. If you want to submit a question, just go ahead and submit your question right there. You'll need to check in by clicking that button, and then you'll need to post your question, hit skip, and then the next thing will be post your question to the chat. We are going to start out, though, with a quick question, probably the most frequently asked question we get. When will I be able to find my ancestors in the 1940 census? Why can't I search the 1940 census now? And I'm going to put you on the spot. Why can't I find my ancestors in the 1940 census now?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's something we would all love to be able to dig into. The federal government has decided that census records are not available until 72 years after they've been collected. So that magic date will be April 2nd, 2012. And at that point, we can start digging into the records and finding those elusive ancestors and answering all those questions we've been asked.
I have a countdown clock on my desk. That's how excited I am about that.
I think I need that clock.
Fantastic. We're going to start with our first viewer-submitted question, and this comes from Rachel. And Rachel, I apologize if I mess up your last name here, Dobsovakova. And the question is, what sources do you suggest to look at to connect children to parents before the 1850 census? Krista, I'm going to throw that one at you.
Yeah, so pre-1850, lots of you know, the 1840 census and back only lists head of household with tick marks for how many people of each age and gender are in the household, which of course then makes finding parents and children and putting families together a little bit more challenging prior to 1850. 1850 then, they started listing entire households together, listing every person in the household. Starting in 1880, the census listed actually the relationship to the head of household. So things get a little tricky. From 1850, 1860, and 1870 census, we see entire households together, but what we don't know is the relationship of those people in the household. A lot of times people just assume if they're in the household, they must be the child of those parents, and that's not always the case. Then, of course, before 1850, it's a lot more challenging. A couple of things that I'd like to show you online. One of my favorite features on Ancestry.com is the card catalog. And I don't know if you use it a lot. I use it constantly.
I do.
So if you can find the card catalog the easiest way it's under your search tab. Now across the home page of our home page, lots of people just click those buttons. But what you'll discover is if you hover over them, you'll have drop-down menus that show up. If you just clicked on the buttons, it will always only take you to the first option. So the card catalog is found by hovering over the search button, and it's the very bottom option there. When you click on that, it takes you to a page that lists all 30,000 plus databases that Ancestry has online. And each database contains hundreds or thousands, or in some cases, tens of millions of names. So this is just a list of all the content that we have. You can then do a keyword search. So for example, if I was looking for families in Georgia, and I think we're going to talk about Georgia a lot today. I've seen several questions from people from Georgia. You can just type Georgia in as a keyword, and it will bring up all databases that have something to do with Georgia or records that contain people from Georgia. You can also use these filters over here and narrow it down that way. And then you can just look for the databases that you're interested in. as far as this 1840 question goes, there's kind of a few tricks that I use to get around it. One of the things that I like to do is if I found a family in the 1840 census, but I just have the name of the head of household and then a bunch of tick marks for those children, I would actually go to the 1850 census, look up Jones families, if that's who I'm looking for, and then look for them in a specific location. So if I had found my family in Carroll County, Arkansas, for example, in 1840, I would then say, you know what, I want to see all Jones families who are living in Carroll County in 1850 and see if I can make some of those connections. You can see, even though that's a very common name, I've narrowed that search in 1850 to show me just Jones families, and now I've got 69 of them. And I can start to look for some names that are familiar, start to trace some of those people and see if there are records that list who their parents are so that I can make some of those connections.
One thing you might want to point out there, Krista, is you took great advantage there of the place filter that we have in advanced search. And what Krista did is by using the type ahead, and thank you for bringing that up there, and then right underneath that you will notice there's a little link where, and if you click on that, that allows you to filter down a specific location. Krista knew to go to exact because she thinks she knows the county. But you can also choose adjacent counties, which is incredibly useful, especially back in the 1850s, because people went to the closest courthouse, not the courthouse that was necessarily in their county. So if you're not finding what you're looking for, you might want to expand out and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. What else have you got for us, Jeannie?
All right.
Ready.
I have a question specifically for Ancestry Ann right now.
All right.
Okay, Valjean Wright asks, my husband's grandfather, James Thomas Stovall, was born in Georgia in December of 1880. Because of the month, he wasn't included in the 1880 census. The 1890 census was lost in a fire, and by 1900, he was out of the house and gone. We can't find his parents. He supposedly was from a large family and was considered a black sheep. On all of the records we've been able to find, his parents aren't listed except in a death record where that a veteran's hospital completed. It says Pete and Louisa. I cannot find a Pete and Louisa in Georgia who fit. And what should she do?
That is a great question. And it was very smart of you to notice because he was born in December of 1880, he would not be on the census. If you look at any of the census pages, you'll notice at the top, it'll tell you the date that census was recorded. So how do we find our mysterious black sheep? Those are my favorite ancestors to track down. There are a couple things I'm going to suggest here. Krista did a great job of showing you how to use the card catalog. Let me show you another place that you can go and look for different resources. Excuse me when I put on my glasses. You know how it is. Once we get older, we can't see without them anymore. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the search tab. So if I click on the search tab, and then I'm going to scroll down the page.
People get so excited about those empty boxes, they just want to fill them in. They forget there's stuff
There's
underneath.
great stuff down here. All right, so here you have the U.S. map, and you can get to the Georgia collections by clicking on the actual state or by clicking on the link over here. It'll take you to the same place. And when you're trying to research a family, what you want to do in a specific location, and remember, it's all about location because every state, every country, every county did their records a little bit differently. So you want to familiarize yourself with the records and the types of records that you might be looking at. So now we're going to go over here to Georgia. And what you'll see on this page, Georgia Census and Voter List. Now, with Georgia, there isn't a specific census that was done around 1880 other than the U.S. Census, but some of the states did have that, so that would be a place to look. There's also birth, marriage, and death records. You might want to look for your black sheep, as they were, in the birth records. And if you're lucky enough to know one of his brothers and sisters, that's who you want to go search for because you may be able to find them in the 1880s. Or if you can find a birth or death certificate, that may give you different names for the parents. One thing about Southerners, and I have lots of them in my family, is they tended to use their middle name and their their first name interchangeably. So they may not be always listed as Pete and Louisa on the censuses.
Yeah, oftentimes part of my family's from the South as well, and oftentimes they would go by their middle name for their childhood and then switch to their first name when they became an adult. A lot of times that was because they were often named after a family member,
Right.
and that family member was still living when they were a child, and so it was easier for them to go by that middle name. So finding all the names of a person really, and searching on all the names will really help.
Plus, then they have the unexplained nickname that you have to find in the census records as well. So birth, marriage, and death records can give you tons of information. This is a great place. Now, you said that, I believe it was James, was in the military. So you may want to start searching through pension applications. Pension applications are a wealth of information. Now, I'm going to guess maybe Civil War. Now, be careful with Civil War pension records in the South. If you have a Yankee in your family, those are held by the federal government. But if you have a Confederate in your family, the U.S. government didn't give them pensions, but the states did. So you'll have to go through and look through the specific state pension records. If you notice here, you have Georgia Confederate pension applications. That might hold the clue to who it is you're looking for. And even if it doesn't have his parents' name, it may have a brother and sister, and that may be the clue to get you back. So spend some time familiarizing yourself with the records that we actually have and start digging that way. Then you can go back and you can use the trick that Krista just showed you. Even if you have just a state, pull up the 1880s, pull up all of the rights in that state. Was it the rights or the, anyways, you know your own last name. Pull that up, pull up the state, and then just start working through the families. Which one seems like a reasonable choice? And also look for names. Back in the 1800s, they tended to use the same names over and over again. Did your great-grandfather or grandfather have children, or do you see those names show up, especially unusual names? That's also a clue. Good luck with your search. Those are tough ones.
Okay, Krista, I have a question for you right now. Amanda Hayes has told us that she has a hard time finding birth certificates. Is this common? And then I'm going to throw in my own part of the question on there. Where are some other places you could find similar information if you can't find a birth certificate?
Okay, Amanda, that's a great question. Oftentimes when we're doing family history research, the census records are really easy to use, and so we get so excited about using census records. But what we're really looking for is those vital records that give us the more concrete or more accurate information. So birth, marriage, and death records are critical to family history, and oftentimes we spend so much time in the census that we forget that, especially when we're just getting started in genealogy. So again, we're going to take you back to that card catalog. The benefit of the card catalog is that it tells you what records are available online at Ancestry.com. So again, you find that by hovering over search, clicking on that bottom link there to get to the card catalog. When you get to the card catalog, you didn't ask Amanda what state you were looking for, so I'm just going to make some assumptions and do this based on my own family history. If you scroll down, I showed you earlier how to do it by keyword, but if you scroll down that card catalog page, you'll see a list of locations. If you click on USA, what it does is it automatically filters that list of 30,000 databases down, and then you can filter it again by state. Now, a lot of my family came from Arkansas, and so I can go down to the state of Arkansas, and this will tell me now that there are 8,200 databases that contain records from the state of Arkansas. But you asked specifically about birth records. So I can then click on birth, marriage, and death to filter it down by collection. And then I can click on just birth to see what birth records exist that contain records about people from the state of Arkansas. Now, this starts to bring up things other than, what you asked for was where to find things other than birth certificates. So if we have birth certificates for a location, they're going to show up on this list. Oftentimes what you're going to find is not the actual certificates, but an index. We have lots of indexes that we've collected from state vital record agencies, from private collectors, from libraries and archives, and those indexes are online, and then generally they'll contain a certificate number where you can then go and order the certificate directly from the state. However, if there are no indexes or certificates, I know lots of states didn't even start keeping birth records until the early 1900s. And so if you're looking for somebody who was born in the 1800s, there are alternatives. One of my favorite alternatives, again, found in the card catalog, is actually in newspapers.
Exactly.
Lots of small town newspapers would include birth announcements. If they didn't include a birth announcement, they might include some kind of a society page that listed that, Mrs. John Smith came from Louisiana this week because her daughter gave birth to a little boy.
Right.
And so you start to look through some of these newspapers for the locations that you're interested in, and you would be amazed at the treasure trove of information that can be found in those. So I would recommend, if you can't find information in birth certificates or birth indexes, that you check newspapers, that you check family and local histories,
Yes.
and then use death records to find birth dates. Oftentimes we tend to think backwards instead of looking forward for information. And oftentimes death records, pension records, lots of other things contain the
Right.
birth date.
Exactly.
Elise Music Brown has asked a question. I've been searching for Emeretta Anderson Cavins for almost 3 years. Emeretta was born in 1882 and died in 1925 in Pike County, Kentucky. And are there some search tips you could offer, Elise, for finding an elusive ancestor?
I would be happy to. All right, so what I'm going to suggest and where I would like you to start, advanced search, because that's where all the power of the search forms are. So if you look up here on your form, and if your form looks like this, you're on what we call simple search. And this is good if you only know a few pieces of information, but you obviously know more. So if you look down here by the search button, you'll see a show advanced link. Click on that, and you'll see the more advanced form. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I believe, and let me look at my little cheat sheet over here, Emeretta Anderson Cavins. I'm going to guess Cavins is her middle name. And since we know that she died in 1925, I'm going to go back to the 1920 census. Go to the most recent document to see if you can find this person. So we'll just use Cavins. Now I'm going to use name filters here. They're incredibly powerful. Now I can just use default settings and it'll match anything that's even close. But I'd like a little bit more control in my searching. So I'm going to go with phonetic matches and names with similar meanings or spellings. Phonetic, you remember that when you were in grade school. That's anything that sounds alike. We do all that magical translation for you. Names with similar meanings, this would be a name like Smith is similar to Schmidt because they may, depending on when somebody came over, they may have changed their name, and we have many, many indexes of this. We have over 800 variations of just Catherine alone. So that will make your searching easier. We'll do the same thing for the first name. If you play with these, you'll find different combinations of these will help you find who it is you're looking for. We also know that she lived in, all right, let me see if I can get this right here, Pike County, Kentucky. So I'm going to choose this from the type ahead, and then I'm going to go, and I'm just going to start by restricting to this place exactly. Scroll on down here, I press on search, and then I find an Emeretta Cavins. I'm hoping this is your person.
She was born in 1882, so it looks right.
1982, awesome. So if we go over here, and please, please always look at the image. This is where all the good stuff is. All right, let me make this a little bigger because nobody can read that. All right, so if we go down here, and if you look down here on the bottom of the image, and you click this little gray arrow, it's there. You'll see the index. And if you look over here, it gives you about an idea of where it is on the image. So we know that Emeretta is down towards the bottom. So let's scroll on down. There she is. Emeretta Cavins, and married to Riley Cavins. This, look at this. She's 28, he's 36. This is married, and there's a little one. So that's probably her first marriage. And then he says married, and I believe that's a one. It also says that they've been married for 8 years. So you now know 1920 minus 8 is they were probably married about 1912. So now you know that you can go start looking for their marriage record. It also says that she's had 5 children. 5 are still living. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Somebody got that number wrong. So maybe not all of these are her children. Be very aware of that. She was born in Kentucky. Her parents were born in Kentucky. Riley's parents were born in... No, they weren't. Look at that. His father was born in Kentucky, and his mother was born in Virginia. These are the little clues that are going to help you go back with each of these. So as we move over here, tells us they were farmers, they were on a farm. This one over here, oh my goodness, I have to go back up here. Yes, he was employed. He had no days of unemployment, and then you can continue reading this. Oh, and he rented a farm. So now you know something about the family. Now, if you go back over here, we also know that I believe that's Elaine. It's hard to read. You know how the censuses were. She's 13 years old. So, wait a minute. They've been married for 8 years, and she's 13?
And
I'm beginning to think that
she's not the mother of all those children.
She's not the mother of all those children. I think you're right. That may be an M2. I'm beginning to suspect Riley was married more than once, and that Elaine or Eloise here was not his first daughter. So make sure that if you find somebody in the census, you don't stop and just attach the record. That is not enough. You have to actually dig into the record, read what's on there, and make some conclusions. You're going to find some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'd like to point out one more thing on your screen, actually.
Of course.
If you go back to the record page, one of the things that is a fairly new feature on Ancestry.com that I love is the suggested records down the right-hand side of the
it's
page.
Awesome.
So if you hadn't been sure that this was the right person, and her last name's unique enough that you're, and her first name for that matter, that you're pretty sure, but if you look over here on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see that Emmerette Anderson is found in the 1900 census, and that there's an Emma Anderson found in Kentucky marriage records. My guess is if you click through to that Kentucky marriage record, you're going to find her married to a Riley Cavins.
Look at that.
So oftentimes Ancestry will do that searching for you and suggest records. Again, these are just suggestions, so you still have to look at them and prove whether or not that this is your person. But those records are suggested to help you get a little bit closer to the correct and accurate information.
Absolutely. And so we found a whole bunch of new information, and you didn't have to go that far. So make sure you look at everything that's out there very carefully.
Okay, so hang on just a second. Robin Smith asks, when having a common first and last name, what is the best technique to confirm if this is your relative? For example, I have a Richard Smith born about 1802 in Morris County, New Jersey. What's the best way to find his parents? There are quite a few Smiths in the area for that time. Krista, what do you think?
So I actually can sympathize with this a lot. Let me tell you, I have a whole branch of my family that are Joneses in Tennessee. And the Joneses in Tennessee tended to have very large families, and they also tended to do this funny naming thing where they all named their children the same thing. Mm-hmm. So my, however many great-grandfather Robert Jones had sons named James and John and Daniel, and every one of those boys also had sons named James and John and Daniel. And sometimes those first cousins were born within just, a year or two of each other, making them approximately the same age, born in the same place, right? How do you take those men and separate them into this is the one, this is the one? If you look at my screen here, what you're going to see is my Dan Jones. My Dan Jones in Rogersville, Tennessee. And he was born in about 1826. And you'll see that one of the things that I've done is actually listed out all of his children. One of the common things that happens a lot in family history research is that we get so fixated on finding somebody's parents. We want to just extend our tree back, and so we look for the parents and the parents and the parents. And what that does is it ends up creating this entire genealogy of one-child families.
Exactly.
When really, they weren't single children at all. But oftentimes I'll ask people when I'm helping with their research, well, tell me about their brothers and sisters. Exactly. And the immediate response I get from a lot of people is, well, I'm not looking for the brothers and sisters, I'm looking for the parents.
But you are looking for the brothers and sisters.
You are looking for the brothers and sisters, and here's why. If you look at this list of children, even though there's a William and a Robert and a James and a John, there's also this child whose name is Nelson. And that's a little bit more unique.
Right.
And so what we're doing is we're using those unique names to help find the family group.
Exactly.
So I may have, and there is, I can tell you for a fact, there are 3 Dan Joneses living in Hawkins County, Tennessee at about the same time period. But if I can find the Dan Jones that has the son named Nelson, then I know that I'm on the right track because I've already proven that father-son relationship, and then I can work my way back another generation with that information. So again, when you're putting those families together, make sure that you're looking for all of the children in a family.
Exactly.
And sometimes use that one or two children that have that unique name to be the identifier. Just one way to identify people with common names.
Okay, and Stephanie Watson asks, what about misspellings on name? How can I make the connection as the record keepers often spelled the name as it sounded due to accents on the ancestor? It's not like any of us have, oh wait, I always have misspellings in my name, and I assume you have too. In fact, you and I discussed this just a couple of weeks ago with your Gillespie. Isn't it Gillespie? Yes,
It is my
family.
Gillespie family. I have this awesome Bible page from the 1860s where they were writing down all the names of the children and the birth dates. They wrote it at the exact same time, and the name Gillespie is spelled two different ways by the same person at the same time. Spelling really wasn't that important back then. Plus, if you add in different accents, Scottish, German, all this thing, you have your enumerators who are wandering the streets collecting all this information. They wrote it down as close as they can get it. Let me show you one of my, let's see if we can bring him up here real quickly, my ancestors. And he has just had a butchered name. Here we go. And you'll notice here, and well, first, let's start with the names. Fulton, Satin, Farlton. I mean, seriously, do you know how long it took me to dig through and try different variations?
He's all the same person.
He's all the same person. So, if you're really having trouble with the first name or the last name and the spelling's not right, there are a couple things you can do. First, I knew he lived in Amherst County. Now, these have all been corrected, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But what you can do, or let's type in Gillespie. So we know that it's Gillespie. I know that Gillespie is often spelled G-I-L-L and then either E-I or A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what we call a wild card. And this wild card is the question mark, and that matches one character. So this is going to match all the variations. That works best if you set it to just exact. So I will take off these. I'm then going to take off the first name so that I can match all of these. I also know that he lived his whole life in Amherst, Virginia. So I'll set that to exact. So this will bring up all the Gillespies that ever lived in Amherst, Virginia. Then if you want to focus down on a specific census, go over to the left-hand column where it says, here, let me go back. Sorry, that was a little quick there. Then do census and voter list. And then you'll see a list of all the different censuses. And you can go through them one by one and find who it is that you're looking for. Let's say we were doing the 1840. So this brings up this. So you'll be able to say, oh no, I just want to look at the 1840s. Now remember too, we found Tarleton here, but we also found a Willis. Now, this was back in the 1840s. Families tended to live together. I wonder if they're related. Turns out they are. They're brothers. And they're both in my family tree. That was one of those branches that twist, but that's another story for another day. So, let's say that you want to go in here and you want to correct the name. So let's go in and we're going to view the record. Over here, on the record page, you'll see where it says Add Alternate Information. You can update information there, or you can go over to the image. And remember, always look at the image. You never know what's going to be there. If you go down here and you open the index panel and you click on the field that you want to update, I can update Gillespie. So I'll say provide alternate for name, choose reason. It's a variation. And then I just simply change it to the way that I know that I'm used to seeing it. I can add a comment. In my family, Gillespie is usually spelled with an E. And I'll try and spell that correctly. Spelling is not strong in my family. Then I have this little message here. then the next time somebody comes through, I've left that piece of information for them. Now, on some of those first names that were just horribly misspelled, that can be a real bonus to somebody. We then take these corrections and feed them back into our index so that when you actually do the search, let's go back here. I'm going to put in the first name so I can show you those egregious spellings. What you see underneath here, it says Tarleton Gillespie. So what that's doing is you've added a bit of information that will make all of your distant cousins' lives a lot easier when they go and they're searching for this person. So it's an act of genealogical kindness that you can do. But the trick is, if you're looking for horribly misspelled names, choose one or the other, focus down on a location you know they were at, and then just start looking through the list of people to see if you can find something that might be close.
Fantastic.
Okay. This is a question for Krista, and it is one that I could have written myself because it mirrors exactly the problems I always have in my family history. Andrea, I'm going to try not to destroy your last name. Zulk asks, my great-grandparents are from the old Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Their place of birth on census records changes. In 1900, it's Austria. 1910, it's Austria-Slovenia. In 1920, it's Austria again. In 1930, it's Czechoslovakia. Also on the passenger list, Mikta Hotra is listed as traveling from Suha. How can I determine where this is, where he's really from?
Wow, okay. So this is really common, especially if you're doing Eastern European research. The boundaries in Eastern Europe for decades and decades and decades have been in flux, just as recently as in my lifetime, right? If you remember in 1989, when the Soviet Union was, going through their political issues, Eastern Germany, the Berlin Wall fell that year. The boundaries were changing all the time. Right. Here in the United States, we tend to get fixed boundaries in our head, even sometimes fixed county boundaries, which 4 or 5 decades ago, there were lots of changes that were going on as recently as that. So what are the challenges is when you find records about your family members and it lists that they lived in 3 or 4 different places, it's very possible that they never actually moved.
Exactly.
I have a family that was living in Kentucky, and they actually were listed as having lived in 3 different states and 7 different counties, and they never moved. And it's just because the boundaries shifted around them. So Eastern European research is if you kind of get in that same mindset, it's very similar. One of the things that you need to do is maybe educate yourself a little bit about when and where those boundaries changed. Now, her question specifically was about the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That was a region, and it was a whole group of things that we would consider, all those different countries now.
Right.
But based on when they were asked the question, where were you born, they may have given the answer based on what it was when they were born there.
Exactly.
They may have given the answer based on what it was in that moment when they were asked that question. Or they may have given their favorite answer,
Exactly.
right? If they identify as being, as being Czech, then they might say they were from Czechoslovakia, but even though it wasn't part of Czechoslovakia at the time. So you have to kind of think about the fact that those boundaries changed and educate yourself about that,
Right.
and then think about what you know about your family and how they might have responded to those questions. The other thing you might want to do is think about what the political climate was when they were asked that question. I have family that's from Germany, but there was a period of time when they would not admit that.
Sure.
And so they would say they were from someplace else because that was a little bit more politically correct at the time. And they didn't want to have to deal with the repercussions or the image that portrayed. So once you get as much information as you can, right, and I think that Jeannie, when she read the question, she said, some records say Austria, some records say Hungary, some records say Czechoslovakia. But when you get to that passenger list, and that's what it sounds like you did, when you get to that passenger list, oftentimes it will list the name of a city. One of the things that we have on Ancestry.com that I love and that I use all the time is we actually have a Jewish landing page for people who are doing Jewish research, but it's useful for people who are doing research at all anywhere in Eastern Europe, because on that Jewish landing page, and you can get there by just going to Ancestry.com/Jewish, there is what we call a Jewish community locator. And that Jewish community locator, you can plug in the name of that town that you found on that census, and when you click search, it will take you to a database and a map that shows you exactly where that community is. It also will list all of the different countries and boundaries that it was part of. That's how you kind of know if you have the right person or the right city, because all of a sudden you'll see, for this one, for example, it says it has a Polish name, it has a German name, the town also has a Slav name, a Slavic name, and so yeah, like the boundaries changed around that location all that time.
Also remember that when they give birthplaces on censuses, you don't know for sure who reported that information.
Right.
It may not have been the person who was actually born in that location. It may be a child. It may be a neighbor. They may have heard they were born such and such a place. So be very careful. Just because it's written down doesn't make it true.
It also depends on how that question was asked.
That's
I think a lot of times the column says, where were you born? But the census taker may have said, so where are you from? And when people ask me that question, it's a very different answer. Where I was born is very different from where I would consider myself to be from.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Okay, Anne, Marshall Lakes wants to know what some of the strategies are for dealing with finding women in the family when you don't know their maiden names.
Yes, those are the tough ones. All right, so let's say that you have someone in 1860. Because if we're going to go back before 1850, then it gets really, really hard. And you can't find a marriage certificate, and in 1860 you've got them married. So what you know at that point is you know when they were born, you know where they were born, and you hopefully know their first name. Now, let's hope they didn't change it. So what you want to do is look in the previous census for that person's first name. For example, let's go into the 1850s. We'll say we're looking for a Sarah. And let's say, I'm going to pick on one of my own personal examples here. So, oops, I have to type in a location before this works. And we know she lived in Grayson County, Virginia, and we're going to choose exact.
Now, she just put in the name Sarah, and that may seem a little daunting to some of you who are going to feel like you're going to get hundreds of thousands of results.
And you will.
But by putting that location in and marking it exact, she's actually restricted those searches.
Exactly. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to do this search. And I have 2,540.
But that's across all the databases on Ancestry.
Exactly. So let's go down here to Census and Voter List. Then let's go to the 1850s. And we'll look in the 1850s census.
Now there's only 146 of them.
Well, I can go through 146,
if
baby.
you have to.
But then we can guess also, let's say we know her age. If she was married in 1860, let's say that she was born in 1838. I'm just making things up randomly here. And then we're down to 43. So those are places to start looking. So what is it that you want to look for? You want to look for naming patterns here. Look in the family. Look at her father's name. Does she end up having a child with that name? Does she have a brother or a sister or her mother? You know, look for all those names, and do they show up in her family? Also look for those people that live with her in other censuses. The people who live with them, sometimes they're listed as boarders, sometimes they may even be listed as servants, but they may actually be brothers and sisters, or you know, the
nieces and nephews,
nephews, other people that will help tie you to these specific families. Then you can start looking maybe through church records, and then go back to the old trusted family histories that are out there for that specific county, or you know, wills, newspapers, and just start digging through these for, you know, marriage notices, these things. But this will at least give you a list of people that you could start looking for as you start to make that connection. Also, if you see a last name here, say Fanner, let's hope that's not one of them, but that might be one of her children's first names, because often what they did back then is they would take the maiden name of the wife and make it a first name of one of the children.
Or a middle name.
Or a middle name.
Yeah.
So that's a good connection that you can also look for.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay. Krista, I want to throw
right, or more closely to accurate, are going to be a little bit more realistic. So again, when you're looking for somebody to know if a family story about a name change is true, trace them all the way through the records in the United States before you try to hop onto where they came from or get into that country of origin.
And let me show them real quick what you meant by the paging through the image. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. So if you're on an image, and it will be any image in any of our databases, up here in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the arrows. Now this doesn't apply just to naturalization records. It also applies to census records. It applies to anything. Always look at the record before and the record after. Because look at here on the census. You don't know if there's family members that were listed on the page before or the page after.
That top family right there, it looks like is a wife and daughter, which means the head of household is going to be listed on the previous
previous page. And not only that, well, there we go. See, and you would have missed that. You should also look at all the surnames on the page and on the previous page and on the next page. You may see surnames that are the same. People tended to live in groups with their families. Or you may see surnames that are also maiden names or other related names. So it's always important to page through and look at more than one image.
Yeah, one of the things we call it in family history is we call them fans. Friends, acquaintances, and neighbors.
Yes.
So you shouldn't just be looking for family members, but also get familiar with the names of the other people living in your family members' community. Because a lot of times, like you're looking at a record from West Virginia, if that family immigrated from West Virginia to Western Ohio, what you're going to find is they didn't just move with their family members. Sometimes they moved with their neighbors and friends as well. And so when you start seeing those same names pop up in another community, you have a pretty good idea that you've got the right family.
And if you're trying to find maiden names, to go back to that question, sometimes you did marry the girl next door. If you see a name and you're trying to pick out of 3 or 4 likely candidates and they lived right next door to him, well,
you're getting closer.
You're getting closer. So, look at everything.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's a question that we get a lot.
Okay.
Michelle Labatt Wallace has just asked the general question. She has no other.
All right. We're just going to pick some random person here. Let's say they
some random person named John Smith.
who was born in, let's make it 1890. Your friend. All right. Probably not the U.S. Indian Census rolls. All right, so let's just go down here. We'll pick a person at random. Okay. So we are in Bexar, Texas.
It's Bear. The X isn't pronounced. Yeah, see.
Well, see, I've learned something today. Thank you, ladies. All right. So we're going to go down here, and we have our John Smith. All right, so that's what we know. Right?
That's what we know.
We've got it. We're done. No, we're not done. Remember what we looked at before? We know he was 51. We know that his wife, Minnie, was 48. We know he was born in Arkansas. We know she was born in Texas. He may have moved there, met Minnie, and married her. I'm just making things up from the image. You're going to want to verify this. We know that Minnie's parents were born in South Carolina. We know that John's parents were born in Tennessee. All right, so
they've also been married. If you look at this image, it looks like for about 23 years.
Exactly.
And they have children that are over the age of 10, and they have children that are over the age of 20. So where you're in the 1910 census, I would actually just work my way back a decade. Go to the 1900 census, look for the same family with everybody in the household about 10 years younger.
Mm-hmm. And then you can also, once you do that and you find them there, you may find out other clues. You may find out other members of the household. Actually, this one, I can't really read that. That's really hard to read. But there may be other members of the household, and that will other people to go search that may find you related members. You can also, because this implies that John had parents, which I'm guessing most of our ancestors did, just guessing. So we know they were both born in Tennessee. We know that let's see, and if you go down here, it'll be real easy. He was born in 1896. So we know that they probably were living in Arkansas in 1896. They may actually be in Arkansas in 1900. It's not a far reach. We also know, I'm guessing their last name was Smith. So we know they were in Tennessee. We know he was born in 1896. Women tended to have children anywhere between the ages of 16 and, say, 45, though we know it could fall outside that range. So now you have an approximate birth date for his mother. So you can start to look for women in that age. Men, they could have fathered a child anywhere from, say, 16 to 60. It's a little bit harder there. But again, you can start to look for people who may have been the parents just by the ages that they were and where they were. Because in 1900, they would have been probably in Arkansas, but not necessarily. But they would have been born in Tennessee. So you can look for their birthplaces and maybe make some connections there. These are the tricky ones, but they're the fun ones because when you actually get those nailed down, those are the most gratifying finds.
Absolutely.
Okay. Wants to know more information. Hi, I'm looking for information on Hannah Deloche and Solomon Gatling, and they lived somewhere near Northampton, North Carolina. How can I find more information on them? And even more importantly, how can I connect to others to see if they're looking for the same people?
Okay, that's a fantastic question.
Indeed.
One of the great tools in Ancestry.com is the ability that our services have to connect you with other people who are researching the same family members. And I think it's probably one of a pretty underutilized resource because people don't know how to make that connection. So let me just show you using one of my family members. I have a great something grandmother. Her name is Charity Ann Shipman. I've always loved that name, Charity Ann. There was a picture of her hanging in my mother's living room my whole childhood, and I always felt this kind of connection to her. My mom was named after her. She has the middle name Ann, and she gave me the middle name of Charity Ann's daughter, and so there's just this real connection there in our family. So Charity Ann was born in about 1844, and she was born in Arkansas. And when you pull up that record, and I'll do that here on my screen, when you pull up that record, if you remember, when you're looking at the index page, you have that whole list of suggested records next to it that will lead you to other documents that might or might not be about that person, but that you should for sure check out. When you go to the actual image, now let me just see if I can do this quickly enough that you catch on, but not so quickly that you miss it. One of the things that people ask often about is how come they can only see a little piece of the image. And I think it's because people don't understand that these panels here are actually pop-out panels, and so they can go away. And so then you have your whole real estate there to look at that image and to zoom in and to work with that. But as Ann pointed out earlier, this bottom panel is actually a copy of the index that we created. That's what you're actually searching.
Exactly.
So it makes it a little bit easier to read through that index than to actually read through some of those names on that image. This other panel over here is where you're going to make some of those connections with other people researching that family. There's this tab here called Member Connect, and what you'll notice as you scroll down is that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and maybe more people who have saved a copy of this record, not just this image, but this record for Charity Ann Shipman to their tree. And chances are that if they've saved that copy of that record to their tree, that they're connected to me somehow. The easiest way to look at that, and I love this one as the example I use because it actually has a picture of her. You click on the tree, and now it will take me to that person's tree so that I can figure out how they're related to me, because it'll start with the home person. Or I can click on Charity Ann's name here, and that will take me to the profile for Charity Ann in that person's tree. And then I can start to see what other records they've attached. You can see here they have photos attached. As a matter of fact, this photo right here is the photo that hangs in my mother's living room. At the top of the tree, you'll see the name of the owner of the tree, and if you click on that, it gives you the opportunity to contact that owner. Now, the way that that's handled through Ancestry is we send a message to that person, and if they respond, we send that message to you. So we don't ever give them your email address. It's all handled privately until you're ready to share that information with them yourself. So what I would do is I would contact this person, say, this is my great-grandmother, here's the information that I have about her, here's maybe a link to my tree,
Right.
so that she can see other information. When you're contacting other researchers, it's always a good idea to volunteer information,
Yes.
not just always ask for information. Otherwise, people are a little less likely to respond.
Exactly. And you never know which cousin, however distant of yours, is going to have that critical piece of information that just makes all the puzzle pieces fall together. So reach out.
Yeah,
Talk to
documents,
people.
photographs, old family Bibles. I've even encountered cousins that I've met through doing this very process who have family artifacts.
Yeah.
A tea set that came from Scotland across the plains of the United States. And that's great stuff to be able to make those
is.
connections and to not just to connect with living cousins, but to find out what information they've got.
Exactly.
Okay, Krista and Ann, you guys have given us fantastic information, suggestions, and everything else today. But now, here's what I want to know. How do I take all of this stuff that I find about my ancestors and make it more meaningful? I mean, I have names, I have dates, I have locations, but I want the story. How can I save this information? Where can I save this information? Where can I really turn it into this person's life? And I'm going to give that one to you to start with. And Krista, I have no doubt that you'll jump in as well.
All right, let me show you something here. Let me go to one of my many family trees. We'll do this one. All right. And I'm going to look for my ancestor with the absolute best name ever. And this is really his name, Ready Cash. I kid you not. And maybe I will go there. And maybe I won't.
Did you pick the correct one of your many trees?
I thought I did. Maybe I didn't. Let's see if he's in this one. Here we go. Ready Cash. There we go. There we found him. All right. And I actually have a document. He was born in 1802 or 1800. I have a document with his actual signature on it. I love it. It's my favorite thing. All right, so what you're looking at here is what we call the person page, right? It's a list of records. You can go find them in the censuses. You can attach them there. I'm sure you all know how to find hints. So let's go over here to the hint. And here he is in the 1850 record. So I'm going to go review the hint, or excuse me, I'm going to click on this. And then I'm going to find the image. Now what I do when I'm looking at an image, I'd love to believe my memory is good. It's not. Ask my family. So what I do is I write up a little transcription of what I'm looking at. Anything interesting that I find about him, what his occupation was, who maybe some of his neighbors were, did he live near any of his children, and I put that in a little text file. And then what I do, after I've actually attached the record, let's go back here and I will attach this record to Old Ready. He's actually a distant relative of Johnny Cash, too.
Well, there you go.
Very distant, but I love that because it's fun. There we go. Finally, we have attached it. And then once we go back over here to the overview, there are a couple places that you can record this information. So if you go over here to the record and you click on residence, I can then take all the notes that I have and I can just type them in here to the description. Notes, notes, notes. And then what happens is, and hopefully you've typed in something much more meaningful than I have, when you go back over here to the overview, that information shows up here. So you can put things that you know, you can put questions that you have that you might want to come back to, and just all the interesting facts that you have. But there's other things that you can do as well. If you go up here to add a story, you can either upload a story that you have on your computer if you want to use a Word file or something with some nice formatting, or if you just want to hack it out here, you can choose, I want to write a story, choose the story title, and then just start typing. And I like to collect all the information from all the different censuses about a person here, and then I have it in one easy spot where I can access it. Then other people can see the story and they can look at the things that you know. You can also add all those fantastic stories that have been passed down through the family here, and then other people can see them as well. So take advantage of the tools we have on the tree to record your thoughts as you go along, because you will not remember them when you come back.
Yeah, and what happens is as you start collecting records, those records are just snapshots in time. But what you're really doing is you're building a story of somebody's life. And you can tell stories. I have written one-page biography sheets about ancestors that are so far removed that there aren't any family stories. And yet just from collecting those records, their Civil War pension file and their census records and their children's birth records, maybe there were biographies written about some of the children or even the grandchildren that refer back to them. You can plug all of those into a story or into a note, and what you're really doing is building a little mini biography about that person's life.
And then you read through it and you feel like you know them.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not just a bunch of random records. There's somebody from your past that you have a sense of who they were and what their life was like.
And that's why I do genealogy. It's not just about filling in the blanks of the names and the dates and the places, but it's about getting to know these people and their stories.
Exactly. That's what makes it interesting.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank everyone for attending our first ever live Q&A, and I guarantee we'll be doing this again. What I would love from all of you in the audience is if you would drop me a quick email to tell me how things went, what we could do better, and what you would like to see us cover next time. You can reach me at Jeanie, Jeanie, at Ancestry.com. And I'm also going to go ahead and put that email address on our Facebook wall, so you'll be able to find it there and send us all your comments. Thanks again for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.